We're very pleased for all of you who found it here to this large auditorium. Before I introduce today's speaker, I'd like to mention next week's event, also on Monday, but in a different location. It's back in the main academic building, G7603, and it's a roundtable about Singapore. The title is Authoritarian Governance in Singapore's Developmental State. And there are three distinguished speakers. For those of you who know something about Singapore, will recognize from neighboring Baptist University. Anybody who thinks Kalimpong is not an intellectual powerhouse is wrong. There are two universities here, Baptist being the other Kalimpong University, and there Cherry George teaches, a very well-known expert on Singapore and media and politics more generally. Second participant in the roundtable is Donald Loh, who's currently at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, Director of the Leadership and Public Policy Executive Education Program. He is a former high-ranking PAP member, and again, for those of you who know Singapore, you know he's been outspoken on a number of issues. And finally, last and certainly not least, our own Stefan Ortman from CIRC, from CityU, who has written extensively on Singapore. So I welcome you all to join us next week as well for that presentation. But today we're very pleased to welcome back for the third time, even a fourth time, Dr. Julio Teehankee, who's Professor of Political Science and International Studies at De La Salle University of Manila. I think it's fair to say if CIRC has friends around the world, Dr. Teehankee, or July, is certainly one of its best friends. We are very pleased indeed for his willingness to come back to us today to speak about the midterm elections. This is electoral season in Southeast Asia, as many of you know. Elections that just occurred in Thailand, we still don't know the results fully. Elections are going to take place this weekend in Indonesia, very important. But there will also be elections in the Philippines in mid-May, and that's what Dr. Teehankee's topic is also for the implications of the larger political system and the very dramatic changes, to put it mildly, that have taken place over the last almost 3 years under presidency of Rodrigo Duterte. So without further ado, thank you again for coming, July. Thank you for your support of CIRC, and we look forward to your talk.
Thank you very much, Mark. Good afternoon. It's good to be back here. I was just here late last year, to give a talk on federalism. But for this afternoon, I'd like to share with you some updates regarding elections in the Philippines, particularly the scheduled midterm elections to be held sometime mid-May of this year. There's a saying that in the Philippines, we only have 2 seasons, wet and dry, but in reality, we have 3. We look forward to wet, dry, and election season. So that's an old joke, but suffice it to say, as Mark said, that it's election season in Southeast Asia. We've just seen elections held in Thailand, and this month it's in Indonesia. And next month it's in the Philippines, but also elections are scheduled for both Japan in the upper house and India. So it's a season for elections not only in Southeast Asia but in the rest of the region. So for this afternoon, I'd like to focus on one particular aspect of Philippine elections, and that is the political party system, especially under the administration of the incumbent President Rodrigo Duterte. The Philippines is unique in the sense that institutionally, it is the only country in Southeast Asia that has adopted American-style presidentialism. Hence, midterm elections in the Philippines has traditionally been considered a referendum on the incumbent president, especially under an American-style presidential form of government. There is a fixed term of office in the Philippines. It used to be 4 years with one re-election, but now for the presidency, it's 6 years, no re-election. But the senators and the vice president is elected for a term of 6 years with the possibility of a re-election. There are term limits for the rest of other elective positions in both the national and local positions. There have been 7 midterm elections in the pre-martial law period. This is what we consider the post-war period in the Philippines from 1947 to 1972 until Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law in 1972 and banned elections and conducted elections under his dictatorship. In the post-Marcos period, after the restoration of democracy, there have been 4 midterm elections, and the upcoming 2019 midterms will be the 5th under this current regime. The sheer amount of elected positions that will be selected this midterm election is huge. More than 18,000 national and local positions will be up for grabs in the midterm elections on May 13, 2019. So that includes 12 senators, 240 district representatives, 59 party list representatives, or what we call the proportional representatives, 81 provincial governors, 81 provincial vice governors, 780 provincial board members, 145 city mayors and vice mayors, and so on and so forth, all the way down to the lowest level of municipal governance. Our current party system is essentially a function of our electoral system design. Again, having adopted the American-style presidential form of government, most of our elective positions are elected by a first-past-the-post single-member district plurality system. And it's either through simple majority or plurality voting, particularly for the presidency, the local chief executives, governors, and mayors, and House members. But 80% of all the elected positions in the Philippines are elected by a very peculiar system of multi-member plurality system. This simply is the use of plurality voting in multi-member districts. No? And this is commonly used in the Senate, provincial board, city, and municipal council. This is also known in the political science literature as block voting, but block voting as a concept is used differently in the Philippines, so we prefer to use this term, multi-member plurality system. The problem with this system is that it is similar to the situation in pre-electoral reform in Japan with the so-called single non-transferable vote, which is a system that does not provide incentives for party members to help each other, but rather it is a disincentive for cooperation, and they end up competing with one another. And this is not good for institutionalization of political parties, particularly in a situation such as the Philippines, where despite the fact that the Philippines has been or had been one of the showcase of Western-style democracy in Asia. In fact, it's one of the oldest democracy in the region, despite of a century of party politics, a history of several party systems, and a multitude of parties. Hundreds of parties have been organized and built through the years. The Philippines still suffers from a seeming lack of institutionalized parties. So we still suffer, despite our long experience in party politics, still suffer from under-institutionalized parties. And this is due to the fact that what we have are patronage-driven parties built around coalitions of political machines. And these machines have become vehicles for raiding the state, extracting rents, and distributing political and economic largesse. So in the Philippines, it has been said that political clans and not parties have been the building blocks of Philippine politics. Some 160 families have dominated our legislative branch and our local government positions since the 1900s, since the time of the American colonial period. Using party system institutionalization index derived from the varieties of democracy data, we can chart the ups and downs of party system institutionalization in the Philippines. During the American colonial period, there was one very strong political party led by Filipino nationalists who were campaigning for the independence of the Philippines from American colonial rule. And from 1900 until 1935, until 1941, in fact, the Nacionalista Party, which is the nationalist party, which is considered the founding party of the Republic, dominated politics in the pre-independence era, in the colonial period. After the war, a faction of the Nacionalista Party split, a liberal, pro-American, open market party split from the nationalist, protectionist party, and this formed the formal two-party system between 1947 and 1970. So, for a brief period, we actually mirrored politics of the United States. So, we had two parties alternating power with one another. And until Ferdinand Marcos decided to hijack democracy, declare martial law, and ruled for the next 14 years as a dictator under the rubric of constitutional authoritarianism. He dismantled all these political parties and pirated members of both the Nacionalistas and the Liberals to form his own super party called the KPL, or the Kilusang Bagong Lipunan. And then he was ousted in 1986 in a people power uprising. And then we have this current party system that we have. So the seeming lack of individual party institutionalization has largely contributed to the disinstitutionalized nature of the overall political party system. So Marcos, and you can see him here smiling, gleefully smiling, laughing. Marcos dismantled the two-party system to build a dominant party system. And this resulted in a phenomenon of members of political families and local political clans switching party of a particular incumbent. So for every presidential administration since Marcos, you can see that they just simply switch parties from one administration party to another. So if you look at the roster of all elected members of our Congress, for example, you will see the same political names, but only their party affiliations are different. So party switching has become an institutionalized part of our party politics. Until the election of Rodrigo Roa Duterte, Duterte's election in 2016 was a surprise, and It was different in the sense that he's the first mayor to be elected directly to the presidency of the Philippines, and he is the first politician from Mindanao. And Mindanao is very, very important because of the perception of the Mindanaoans that they have been neglected by Imperial Manila. Now, despite the lack of solid party support and political machinery, the former mayor of Davao City in Mindanao rode a wave of angry votes to capture the presidency in 2016. Since the restoration of liberal democracy, formal liberal democracy in the Philippines after the fall of Marcos, close to 30 years since the restoration of formal liberal democracy, there was a feeling among the middle class, the lower class, that liberal reformism has failed to deliver its promise, particularly in terms of development. Despite the so-called much vaunted economic growth heralded by previous presidents, the middle class and a large segment of this middle class are working and sacrificing by working abroad as overseas Filipino workers, and then a huge number of lower class poor Filipinos who are still suffering because we cannot really put a big dent on poverty in the Philippines. So because of this, Duterte was able to capture the angry votes, and he won in 2016. Now, one way of explaining the victory of Duterte and the current transformations in the way politics is conducted in the Philippines is by looking at the elements of marketing political candidates in the Philippines. Essentially, there are two elements in the way elections are conducted in the Philippines. Political operators and political consultants usually speak of the pull factor. These are elements that will attract voters to a candidate. And usually, this refers to market votes. Votes that can be drawn through attracting, highlighting the characteristics of a candidate through popularity, either that candidate is already very popular because he or she is a celebrity, an actor, an actress, sports star, or has some achieved some level of notoriety. And usually this is reflected in the quarterly surveys that are produced by the two leading survey firms. Now, what constitutes market votes? Essentially, candidates who are able to project an image that resonates with the public. Either he or she projects an image, in the case of Duterte, a no-nonsense local executive who has transformed the crime-ridden city of Davao into a developing city, a tough punisher, or issues, for example, good governance, anti-corruption, etc. So this is part of what is known as the air war. But there's the other element, the push element. And this refers to the machinery or the natural ethno-linguistic bailiwicks that can be organized, and this is in the United States what they call getting out the vote, either through money, no? Or either through the party machinery, or more often than not in the Philippines through the use of government resources. So in the past cycles of elections, national elections, particularly in the presidential election, it is not necessarily true that the candidate or candidates, even for the Senate, who have the most organized political machinery or who has the most organized ground war mechanisms will be able to win the election. So what we have learned in recent elections in the Philippines is that ground war alone or command votes, which is the traditional way of conducting electoral campaign in the Philippines, is no longer the only key to success. There must be some element of air war. And a third element is the rise of social media as a mechanism, a channel for firing up the base. But this is only one aspect of what we call the network, the use of social media in election campaign in the Philippines. There is the other element, which is much more important, which is using data analytics to micro-target message and demographics of supporters. And in the previous election, we have seen how the supporters of Rodrigo Duterte astutely managed its social media campaign. And he had the support of social media specialists who were able to read through the data and targeted and really focus on the message that fueled his base and resulted in getting out the vote. This eventually helped organize his machinery despite the fact that he did not have an organized political party. And this is despite the fact that he was not able to buy as many television and radio ads as the other wealthier competitors. So one element is that net war is becoming a much cheaper alternative to the traditional expensive air war that utilizes television ads. Okay, so this is explaining Duterte from a political marketing perspective. So I wear many hats. I also dabble in political consulting, so I know this. So, okay. But now, going back to this year's election, historically, the incumbent administration party usually has the advantage because they have the resource and all the political donors would prefer to donate to the administration party, and all the local politicians usually switch to the administration party. But this year, it's different because the Duterte administration is fielding two separate slates. So he has his own slate, which is led by a coalition which is led by his political party, although he is not really a how should I put it, a working member of that party. He's a nominal member, but it was the party that nominated him and got him elected as president. This is the so-called PDP Laban Party, no? Which has its own slate of candidates called from different political parties supportive of Duterte. But his daughter also organized her own slate. And she organized, the daughter of Rodrigo Duterte is the incumbent mayor of Davao. She succeeded her father. And this early, people are already saying that this is paving the way for her own candidacy for the presidency in 2020. Hence, the calculus for this year's midterm election is made with the end view of the 2022 presidential election, in which Mayor Sara Duterte could be the candidate to be supported by the coalition currently supporting President Duterte. The opposition, which is composed of the party that used to be the dominant party, barely was able to fill its own slate. A senatorial slate is composed of 12 candidates. The opposition has only 8, and only 1 or 2 of them are ranking well in the surveys. And in the midterm elections, particularly for the Senate, one's position in the surveys are important. As I've said, historically, incumbent administration usually have the advantage during the midterms. And what we are seeing in the recent results of the survey is that Filipino voters are choosing legacy candidates. Name recall. These are candidates who have, this refers to celebrities, political clans, or even re-electionists, who have already successfully transformed their name into a national political brand. So, if you are a newcomer, unless you have the support of the administration, it is next to impossible for you to win a seat in the Senate. So, we are seeing familiar names, Aquino, of the Aquino clan, which has produced two presidents. We can see Marcos, the daughter of the former dictator, and so on and so forth. Okay. According to the surveys, the qualities that one is looking for in a senatorial candidate, the top choice will not be corrupt, which is actually strange because 2 of the leading candidates for the Senate have plunder charges. They were actually in jail for corruption. So, but they're on top of the survey. So there's this disconnect between what the voters want and who they want to elect. And of course, one reason for this is that the other elements or qualities are they want their candidate to help or at least show concern for the poor, or has good personal characteristics, or trustworthy. As you can see, all of these traits are personalistic. So it's not really about addressing climate change or disaster risk resilience or lowering crime rate or stopping inflation. So it's all about approachable, has good leadership qualities. So it's still personalized, not actually personalized. Okay. But Rodrigo Duterte, despite all the controversies and surrounding his administration and his leadership style, remains to be one of the most popular presidents ever in the post-Marcos period. So this will help in the campaign of the pro-administration senatorial candidates, one of which his close aide from number 33, 24, way out of the winning circle, in a matter of months, given the resources he was able to generate through the support of various sectors to the Duterte administration. And given his close ties and given his advertisements on television and his social media presence, Bongo has managed to jump from, where's Bongo? Here, this is Bongo. Bongo is the sort of special assistant to the president. He did not hold any government position in the past. He was just the executive assistant of the president when the president was formerly mayor of Davao. And out of nowhere, he is now number 3. Number 3 in the survey. So you can see that there is some element of transferability, at least, in terms of identifying with the president. While the rest of the opposition candidates, only one former senator and former presidential candidate that Duterte defeated in 2016, only one makes it to the winning circle. Okay. So, what is interesting is that unlike previous presidents who have invested time and resource to build an administration party, a super dominant administration party to support his or her legislative agenda and political agenda, this president keeps on preaching to the voters, you don't owe politicians anything. And this is based from his own experience. When he ran for the presidency, he only had 3, 4, at most 5 politicians supporting him. And yet he won. So he's saying he was able to eschew, avoid patronage-based political party by building an alternative channel for political mobilization. And this is what in the literature is now called populist mobilization. And Paul Kenny from the Australian National University in his recent book defines it as a strategy to build a mass of supporters to gain and retain powers with the minimum of institutional intermediation. So while Duterte seems to be shaking up the political party system, the entire political system for that matter in the Philippines, it is still highly personalized. It is still about Duterte. Trust me, I'll take care of the problem. So there's no real effort to reform the electoral system, to reform the political party system. Although, in fairness, he has convened a committee to review the 1987 Philippine Constitution in order to introduce political reforms, particularly federalism. But the next question is, while he's pushing for federalism, his daughter is organizing a coalition of different regional parties all around the country and has been coalescing with other political parties nationally. But most of these local political parties, regional political parties, are political parties dominated by local political clans and dynasties. So, it is possible that we might have a national, the emergence of a new national coalition composed of local regional parties, which is good for the cause of the regions and local government, but at the same time, the fact that these are all parties of the political dynasties might not augur well for genuine democratization in the country. So, like to end with a question of whether this Duterte style of governance will just be a fluke, and later on will be replaced by a different style, which still working within the liberal, democratic, reformist framework of the post-Marcos period, or is this the start of a new regime, the end of the old regime, the end of the liberal reformist regime, and the emergence of a populist democratic regime, using the term of the Greek political scientist Takis Papas, either populism in office turns out to be feeble, in which case it is soon forced back into opposition, or it proves strong and consolidates in power, and later on even the opposition adopts a liberal and populist strategy. So with that, I think that's my final slide. Thank you very much for your kind attention.